Harry Pearson.
Thank you. Oh, me. Well, listen, guys, if my mother hadn't done what she did, I wouldn't be here today. So do we have any celebrities in the audience besides Joe Reynolds and Carl and Marilyn Marchesota? Well, Arnie Nudell was here last night, but he has a business meeting. But he's back, and he's working on a speaker that looks impressive. And he always made good ones. Okay, so I want to talk about reviewing. I want to tell you what I'm not going to do. I don't want to mention names. And I really don't want to mention specific publications. I'm not here to talk about specific failings of any of us. I am here to talk about what we need out of reviewing right now and what we need out of reviewers. And I'm going to throw this open to questions once I finish what I hope are brief remarks and let you have at it. But I don't want, again, I don't want to talk about the absolute sound, good or bad, and I don't want to talk about any reviewers, good or bad, because that's not the point. The point is, I believe that we are living at the era, at the beginning of the high end, the best era ever. We have breakthroughs in equipment right now you would not believe, and more on the line. I can name a few just for fun. Valachi, for example, who's here, has a battery-operated tube unit that is both a line stage, and then they added a Phono stage. The battery charge will last 60 hours, but if you turn the thing off, it recharges. What it does is it removes all the outside noise from the power line, and if you hear it, the clarity will shock you. What it needs is somebody to describe what kind of AC power sounds like. And I don't mean the kind that the so-called power conditioners, which are better in and of themselves. Conrad Johnson has a new set of electronics out. And what they have done is they put Teflon capacitors in them everywhere, all of them. And they think that the Teflon plus the circuit changes has straightened out the time relationships in a way that I'm having trouble defining. Because the timing on most electronics is wrong. But you won't hear that unless you know about the real thing, which is, of course, the absolute sound. And one of my always remarks is that, even saying this, that equipment is the avenue to the absolute sound. It is not an end in itself. So it is the highway you take to get to the music. Now, of course, when you're traveling on a highway, there are always sideshows. And these are the things you can fall in love with. And people like that say to me, well, Harry, it can't be achieved. You'll never have a perfect sound or absolute sound. And I say, well, if you give that up, you give up progress. Then you're making vanilla ice cream. You're sort of the Ben and Jerry. And I really believe that we've got to look at equipment in terms of reducing colorations, reducing distortions, so that we can hear more of the sound. Now, I would hope all of you eventually go to a live concert, but I'm not so foolish that I don't know that a lot of people don't. But I don't think that can stop you. I think we had this afternoon in the lobby, one of the world's best Mozart players was playing on a grand piano, flown in, by the way, by Ray Kimber, who also flew in 2 tuners. And I asked, is it sushi or not? No, bad joke, Harry. And he signed out. He did a box of Mozart, which you can get, I think, from Ray. And he came out to play a mini concert. I think for me, I had my absolute sound shirt on, so I knew I was hearing the real thing. And yet here were tons of people going by, and nobody really stopping to listen. And the Steinway's loud. I was reminded of the story of this wonderful violinist, Joshua Bell, who stationed himself outside the federal building. And nobody knew who he was, so all the federal employees walked right by him. He's out there playing Bach and the Chaconne and stuff. Anybody hear it? Well, here you have a supposed audience of music lovers at this show, and I'll bet there weren't more than 12 people there. And I thought, and this guy played an amazing Mozart sonata. Of course, that's not the most commercial thing, but it was really a lovely experience, and it's there. And well, I'm babbling, right? So I think I want to talk about, let me say one more thing about music. Music, in my opinion, is holy. And it's one of the ways to get almost to the divine, however you define the divine. Because music, you really can't be expressed except as music. And if you know that you're on a holy chase in a sense, if you're trying to get the real sense of the real thing in the home. And that's why I adopted the concept of the absolute. It's not entirely why. The concept of the absolute sound was so that you could say, there is a goal. There is a reference we can compare everything to. If you go listen to a piece of equipment and say the flute sounds like a piccolo, it's wrong. I don't care how it measures. I don't care what the time relationships are, it's wrong. If the viola sounds like the cello, it is wrong. You shouldn't be listening to it unless you want this technicolored glop all over your sound. And a lot of components that are the roadside components I mentioned briefly a second ago give you that kind of really wonderful chocolate ice cream with hot fudge sauce on it, but they're not real. And I don't have a problem with that if that makes you happy, but I don't think we should abandon, especially as critics, I don't think we should abandon the concept of an absolute, and we must not. And what's happening now is that's exactly what is happening almost universally, online, in print, and everywhere else. A lot of people do not compare things to the real thing. Think about it. Read it. What they're writing, is, in my opinion, is advertorial copy. So if you make the manufacturers happy, and it's not written for you. And what reviews should be written for is each one of you, so that you know whether you'll be interested in following it up or whether you wouldn't be. So if you're interested, well, whether you're interested or not, you're going to get it. I was going to tell you a little bit about where I came from, and well, hi. Hi. And how I got there, and how it ties in sort of with this. I was born in the mountains of North Carolina, where we had obviously no live music down south. Very little. And the record player was the only way I heard any music. I was lucky, I suppose, because when I got a record, it was like paradise. And I got a lot. And as I went along, you should have seen me go through systems. The first real records the first great experience I had was stereo. And that's when I really got fascinated. And then I think my second great experience probably was Mercury Living Presence. Because no matter what system you had, the sound was so honest, it sounded good, which was an amazement. You think about a lot of records made today, it depends on what system you have them on, whether they sound good or not. I went to college, and I had decided I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And my mother says, "Why do you want to be a psychiatrist?" And I said, "You should know." And I think she did. Well, what happened was I ran up against organic chemistry. And that was the end of psychiatry. But then I thought, well, maybe I'll be a psychologist. Meanwhile, I was collecting enough hours to be an English major. But in psychology, we did a lot of experiments. And what was interesting was I learned techniques that could be applied to reviewing, like the intercommentary system that we did in the early magazine. Because you get different viewpoints of the same thing that give you a fuller sense of what the component can and cannot do. And we would pick out basically the good components to do this to, and also, as somebody noted, the ones that we could ship around. Especially when we started, we were a very small magazine. I graduated from Duke, and the Army beckoned. You can imagine what a joyous experience that was. And I was going to be drafted. And I went to the Duke Placement Bureau, and there's this wonderful, wonderful old lady named Fannie Y. Mitchell. Classic Southern name. If you're named Fannie today, you're a mortgage company. Or something else. And she said, you wrote this play that was produced here, and you wrote this magazine that was articles for these magazines. So I got a job opening at a Winston-Salem Journal-Sentinel. And they can hire you, and they will hire you. They don't care if you have to go to for that short period of time, because they knew it was 6 months and I was gone. So I did go to see the Winston-Salem Journal-Sentinel, and I was hired. But what I didn't realize was, once in journalism, you can't get out very easily. And I took my journalism very serious. But when I got to Winston-Salem, there were problems almost immediately, because they said, do you smoke Salems or Winstons? And they said, when you go to cover the civic club, which the beginning reporters have to do, we go to the Lions Club, the Elks Club, the Rotary Club, the Grandmother's Brazier Club, we go to all of those things. And they said, and I smoked then, and I smoked Lucky Strikes. It was not a Lucky Strike, as it turned out, because I would go, and I didn't want to, they called the paper to complain that I wasn't smoking this and supporting the local thing. Well, I figured I was doomed, so I went to the Army, and I came back, and the only job I could easily get was working for the Nashville Tennessean, which is a great newspaper. And they turned me into a hard reporter, meaning that I got the tough stories after I went through the break-in period of avoiding the civic clubs. And the thing about that, and the Tennessean taught me, and I was going to apply this, I didn't know, was that you don't report from an angle. You cannot report from an angle. You can observe and report what you see and what you hear and what you take down. And if you walk into a story with a bias, everybody's going to know it. And they will, because readers aren't stupid, even if they may seem so today. They aren't. And they said, go in, report it almost like you would if you were a drama critic, except, of course, we were covering a different kind of drama. And I thought about this, and I still follow this, and I thought I should bring a kind of reporting, don't go to sleep, to the absolute sound. I wanted the magazine to be set up so that we followed certain psychological precepts, which were the intercommentary system to give you a fuller thing, and then we began to run into, I didn't tell you about starting it, did I? Well, one more story about that. Newsday hired me later, and I was hired by Bill Moyers, who was the best journalist I ever worked with, and the fairest. And he came from Texas, by the way, and was Lyndon Johnson's press secretary, lest you move too fast to stick a label on him. And he asked me, since I had a lot of awards, and I really did, he said, what do you want to do? Do you want to cover economics? Because I won the National Business Journalism Award. Do you want to cover politics? I did the National Political Science Association Award and went after Faubus and his gang. And I saved a river in Arkansas called the Buffalo, or instrumental, not solely. And he said, do you want to do environmental writing? And I had environmental fellowship too. So I said, environment's going to be the issue of the century, the rest of the century. No matter what you say, environment will be the issue. And I had no idea what I meant in the sense of, I mean, we started, when I moved to New York in Newsday, it was different from saving wild places. In Arkansas, everything was polluted. I found out that we were dumping, is this going to get censored? We'll do it Mared, into the ocean. And sewage was running into the ocean, and people were swimming accompanied along the beaches. I found out that there was a nuclear power plant being built without any studies. I found out that the groundwater was being polluted because people were using runoff. And these were the stories I was doing, which were entirely different, and they required a kind of attention to detail. Unfortunately for me, or maybe not, the publisher of the paper was a guy named Guggenheim. And Bill Moyers authorized, but did not write, an editorial defending the rights of the Black Panthers. This was during the early 70s when the Black Panthers were, I want to say what it was today, but Guggenheim had a fit. So what he did was he went around and sold the paper to the Los Angeles Times on the proviso that Moyers be fired and not ever rehired. And that did it. And that's the time when I starting the magazine. And still holding on to the job so I had some money so I could eat. And the way I started the magazine was, I remember what Gordon did. What Gordon did was, Gordon started me on this. He was writing for High Fidelity when he wrote a review of the double KLH9s. And what he did was he said, these are the best speakers ever made, or the best I've ever heard. And he raved for a full page. And it was a great review, by the way. Well, guess what? The other speaker manufacturers in High Fidelity complained. And they complained because how are we going to advertise there if your reviewer says, so Gordon, I don't know whether Gordon was pushed out the door exactly or whether he voluntarily left, but he said enough is enough, and he figured that advertising was ruining the magazine. So he started an ad-free magazine called Stereophile. And what he did was he wrote letters to people who, like me, advertised in the back of audio or somewhere, and telling about the Stereophile and what he had and did. Now, there were a whole bunch of us, including John Coolidge, who helped me start the magazine, and others, who subscribed to Stereophile because we needed somebody to tell us what it sounded like. If you lived down south like I did then, when Gordon started this, it was almost impossible to go hear a component. And there were very few stores anywhere. So if Gordon said, like, he liked the KLH, so did I. And I'm talking about electrostatic, but they're regular cone speakers. And so he said, this is good. And I went and listened and bought a KLH Model 6, which I adored. It was one of our early speakers. And I could trust him, and the rest of us could trust him. And he was doing a lot of recording in those days, so he had a reference to the Absolute, his own recordings of the Absolute, and Gordon was good at doing this. And this was going very well until he began to get, I don't know whether bored, he was doing a lot of writing for Danico and stuff on their instruction books. And so I'm not sure why he got bored, but he started putting the magazine out less and less frequently. And the more infrequent it became, the more frustrated me and my audio buddies. And you know, if you have an audio buddy back then, friends for life, okay? It said, I called up John Cooley and said, well, I think we could do this. And John Cooley said, they'll laugh at us. And I said, no, they won't. We'll outright them. And so what we decided to do was to throw out all measurements and use the ear. Because my argument was that traditional measurements only measured the things that the people wanted to measure, but they didn't measure the whole thing. And a lot of designers did not accept the notion that there were other things. In those days, they said tubes have no depth. They just give the illusion of depth. And there shouldn't be a wide sound stage because that's distortion laterally or some phrase, I forget what it was. And you can't hear any sounds less loud than 3 dB. All these concepts we tackled. And we tackled through listening experience. And what we said was, we'll do measurements if they get to the point that they will, in some cases did. Like digital, we really do have to thank measurements for identifying certain distortions nobody ever heard of before. I mean, like timing errors. I mean, jitter. Who ever heard of jitter? And we learned a lot because we found out something too with our work. And I'll get to that in a minute. But we found out if you can identify a problem, the designer can cure it. And you usually will. And this turned out to be a big insight. Arnie Nudell was here yesterday, and he could tell you, because what we did was, well, back up. I had a bunch of reviewers, and sometimes we were reviewing the same product, but we weren't talking the same language. So if somebody said that's low frequencies, what did that mean? Did that mean mid-bass? Did that mean deep bass? What did it mean? And I said, well, what we obviously have to do is we have to get a language for all of us that we can use. And I suggested what we do is take the musical instruments and the scales of the musical instruments and relate our frequency extremes and the words to them. And pretty much everybody agreed with that, and that's what we did to start. We built on Gordon's work identifying colorations, which he did superbly well. Like transparency and other terms we still use today because Gordon devised them. We tried to go beyond that, and I think we did, but maybe the most amazing achievement occurred was when one night in a mood, I had Arnie Nudell's QRS speaker, which in those days had the 2 strip panels, the tweeters and the mid-range. And the mid-range were Strathans, which were true ribbons in those days. And the tweeters were those, why can I ever think of what you call a pasted-on pseudo ribbon? Thank you, planar. It's the oxygen. It's the lack of oxygen. It's gone in my brain. Anyway, he had a big woofer box on the side, on both sides, and they were horrible. So you could listen to this wonderful mid-range and highs, and then you hear the sound of the woofers. And it sounded like that with everything. So what we did, and Wendell Diller was there visiting, we found my old QRS bass panels. And what we did was we took the woofers off and hooked up the QRS panels. And all of a sudden things happened I'd never heard. Stage expanded because there were no diffraction effects from the woofers or the raised edges of things. Then you could hear out to here, and the instruments were in the place they should be. It wasn't a phase effect. If the trumpet was over there, it was over there. If the timpanis were in there, they were, and you could tell. You use the Mercury record. We use the Composer's Orchestra because they recorded that with 3 mics, and we found not only that, but we could hear depth. We could tell it was up front, and we found out the depth on tubes was right, and that solid state didn't do depth then. That was one thing I think we taught them. But what taught me was we had a spatial language. We had a concept of space we could give to the world. And that's what I think this absolute sound would be remembered for, is we examined the third dimension. Excuse that phrase, didn't wear glasses either. And we had a 3-dimensional space in front of us. And we were able to refine technique. We were able to hear things in recordings. And you know, interestingly, I'm sure you guys know this, but some of the most accurate recordings were the ones with the least mics. It is no big surprise to me that when Telarc started out with digital, that they only used 3 mics. And people forgave them a lot of the digital artifacts because there was a natural perspective by the miking technique. So all of that sort of lined up in a way that I was really proud of what we did. I really felt and still feel that multiple commentaries are necessary. Mr. Ballin pointed out to me last night and again in the lobby that that's not practical these days, because how could I ship a pair of solutions all around the country? And I said, well, I'm not saying that. We've got plenty of small speakers. Carl is making a beautiful little micro reference, which is one of the best small speakers I have ever heard. You can ship that anywhere. And then Jonathan said, well, would they give you 2? Well, I could transship it. Would they allow you to transship it? How could they stop me? You know, the fact is, I think that more perspective on sound, when people agree. I mean, if somebody thought that the speaker stunk, it wouldn't be pointless. It'd be a negative review, and that wasn't our point. Now we live in the age of what I have to call the rise of buzzwords. And there's one I want to take on and argue with, and then what I'll do is open the floor for questions. And I hope you guys will ask what you feel in the context of remembering that all of us reviewers really have to work together. And anything you can do to sit on the reviewers about listening to the real thing and describing things accurately and helping us to further develop the language. That's what we have to do. We've got a new language. I mean, like the Furotrek is a Furotek. No, we do have a new language. This device, you put a record on, and it demagnetizes the record because the vinyl has all of these iron particles in it. And this lines them up and essentially eliminates them, at least for one play. Well, what happens is this veil, I call it an aura of grain, my new contribution, disappears. And you can hear into it, and there's nothing between you, and there's more depth. You can hear the back wall of the hall if it's there to be heard. It's an amazing thing, but you've got to have the language, and you've got to have concepts. So guys like you can go out and say, okay, I buy this record, I put on a Furotek, or I hear one, what will I hear? Or what kind of things will I hear? And you sort of say, this is why I think it's worth checking out, but you've got to check it out. I can't check it out for you, and you must not trust me or any reviewer. You have to work on your own sense, and you have to go around and see if you can hear it. I mean, you can use us as guides, don't get me wrong, and I like to think I do that really well. But here are the days of the buzzword. Excuse me. The word best. Is everybody ready? That's the best speaker in the world. Now, of course, this immediately offends me. How can it be the best speaker in the world unless you have heard all the speakers in the world? Or that's the best sound at the show. Did you go to all the exhibits? The best speaker in the world. Even if you heard all of them and could, you're going to find a dozen or more that you consider excellent or superior. How would you choose that? How would you choose among them? The only way you could choose among them, and you still couldn't say best, you could say this does the least damage or this does the damage I can live with. It's like when you use a Leica versus a Nikon. They're both excellent cameras, but they do different things well. And how do you say what's best there? You have to say what I can live with and what flaws I can tolerate, even in the best. Now, for something being the best in show, go around here. I can tell you a couple things I heard that I think are awesome. But is that the best in show? I can say that's the best thing I've heard, and I can say that. But you're relying on me to tell you that it's the best I've heard. It doesn't mean it's the best any of you have heard. It doesn't mean I'm right. It may mean it's worth looking into. But you get best everywhere. I think it started with another magazine, and I'm not going to name it, but I could. It started with a speaker on the front cover and saying, "the best!" exclamation point. And now everybody's saying the best about everything. Now, to me, that's a deterioration of reviewing. It's a kind of almost bigotry. It's to label something as the best when it is clearly an open field that you can judge for yourself on. And let's see, I think there's one more thing I wanted to talk to you about on this thing. Did I write notes? I wrote notes, but I didn't read them, did I? Well, that's like me. I'm going to write reviews like that. I'm going to write a review on a blank paper, and I'm going to say it's utterly transparent and neutral. Okay. Well, I think that's actually, somebody asked me another question last night, and I didn't answer it. And it's a question that needs to be asked, and I need to talk about a little bit, and probably in question and answers more. And this question and answers thing is, what about your relationship with the manufacturer? The specific question this guy wanted to know, that he wrote down on my paper so I wouldn't forget it after all the chocolate martinis, was that what do you do with a chummy relationship with the manufacturer? And a lot of manufacturers, and Carl can tell you that this is true, try to befriend a reviewer in order to make friendship soften the review if. And what I do, and what I think every reviewer should do, is you tell the manufacturer if you like them. And a lot of these guys are likable. Most of the guys who start in this industry start out because they have a dream. And a lot of them come from small businesses and from the outside world. We are not an engineer-dominated field in general. We look at this and we say, look, I'm friendly, I like a lot of people, but understand this, I would expose my grandmother, rip her brassiere off in public if she was wrong. That's my job. Now, if you can't take that, and in a commentary system, by the way, the manufacturer would get a chance to comment on the review. But I found out when I was doing the Absolute Sound that they don't really want to comment on the review. They want to write the review and say, "Oh, Mr. Pearson, that was wonderful. We really appreciate that." And so I wasn't getting another viewpoint. So I thought, okay, but we still hang on to that. The chumminess back to, you say, this is the way it's going to be. And I've had manufacturers blow their top. Arnie blew his top over my mating a speaker that didn't exist. But you know what he did? And he said this today. He said, "I thank you because I went back and designed a great woofer system because I listened to what you said." And this is why I think great criticism can help designers do better work. I really believe that. And if you think I'm an idealist, guilty. Oh, yeah, one more thing I almost forgot to talk about. Oh. Well, don't ask me. I don't know. Advertising. Thank you. How could I forget it? I forgot advertising. Okay. I started the Absolute Sound the same way Gordon did Stereophile. I didn't take any ads for 10 years. And I was trying to live off the subscriptions. And that's very difficult because the subscriptions go like this. And if you want to have a regular publication schedule, you almost have a regular foundation. But my big shock came when I found out that the reviewers want to read, not the reviewers, the readers want to read ads. They do, too. It's amazing. Well, think of it. People flip through the magazines to read the ads. So if you have ads, you're real. You're credible. You're not, quote, underground anymore. So what I did was I hired the best advertising salesperson, a woman, by the way, Chris Ewing, who was instructed to tell people, You buy a page in which you can say anything you want to in the absolute sound, but that gives you no access to the staff. That gives you no extra mentions. You don't get these little, what's new at such and such company. You don't do that. You let them buy a page, 2 pages, whatever they want to do. You don't put any restrictions on it except the libel laws, which aren't generally applicable here. And we had a really successful run at this. And so I came up with this saying that probably is not original. I said, it isn't advertising per se that corrupts. It's the greed for advertising that corrupts. Because you're going to, if you've got a good magazine, people are going to want to advertise in it. And that's the truth. The Absolute Sound did really well with the ads and with that policy. Excuse me, I've got dehydration. Lack of chocolate martini. May I have a sip? Okay. I need for you to do something for me. I want you to recognize the questionnaires. When we ask a question, I want you to stand up and say your name so that he can hear you. If we have to bring a mic, we will. You in the back would speak loud so that Art will essentially call on people. I will answer the question, and we'll try to keep this under control. Remember, no slamming the guilty. Go ahead, would you? Step up.
Sure.
Please. Up here, at the mic.
Okay.
You have to be there.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it gives you a symbol of authority.
Cool. For once.
For once? That's funny.
Okay, question, Steve.
Harry, thank you.
Identify yourself.
First of all. Pardon me?
Identify yourself, please.
Stephen Norbert with Edge Electronics. This is Kelly.
Can you guys hear it?
No.
Stand up straight,
All right.
talk from your chest, like I
I try to
do.
do it more from my diaphragm, in fact.
Yes.
Thank you for being here, first of all. And I, first and foremost, also want to thank you for taking responsibility for your perceptions when you talk about what is best according to what you perceive, and the responsibility that each of us have for caring for our senses. Yeah, I could go a long way with that, but just
don't.
right there.
What's the question?
My request is that you say a little bit more about this thing that you refer to as inner commentary as it relates to our biases.
Well, what I didn't talk about, and I think should be in the magazine, because the subject is so complex that I've been intimidated by having to talk about it, because there's so many things I could cover, I didn't know how to arrange it. I could go on for 3 days and talk and cover different aspects of what I've learned. Biases are something that should be in every reviewer's lexicon, and in every issue, periodically at least, the reviewer should identify his bias. What kind of music does he listen to? And you can list those recordings. What kind of, maybe a sketch of the room, so you can put the reviewer in a context. It's essential that you guys be able to put the reviewer in a context so you can tell from whence he comes, so to speak. And what is his bias? Where is he coming from? I mean, I tell everybody that I like unamplified and last hand, but I like classical basically, but I can do very well with folk and other things. But the orchestra and the big sound, me. And I don't want anybody to be under any illusions about that. I've published pictures or sketches of my rooms, and I've tried to describe them. I've tried to put me in as much of context as I can so that when you read me, you know that I'm coming from here. You don't know that from any reviewers much these days. You don't know where they're coming from. Obviously, you don't know where they're going if you don't know where they're coming from. And well, it's true. And you know, it's a very difficult situation because we're missing context. See, all of what I've been talking about now, and probably inarticulately, is process. And it's the issue of process that we have to be concerned with. And it's the process of reviewing. And so what is the process of reviewing? Well, I mean, how would you know if you read some name on the internet? I don't know when, and I wouldn't use it if I did. Why should you take him seriously? What is his reference equipment? That's another part of it. Now, and I don't mean the kind of reference equipment somebody lists and says, you read 25 names. That's not relevant to the review. That's bragging. well, I have that preamp, and I have this amplifier, and I have 3 versions of that, and I have that, and that, and that's done all the time. But that's not context. That is not process. We need to know the reviewer, and we need to know his weaknesses, which he will automatically reveal by telling you where he's coming from, what he listens for, and what kind of room he listens for. And a good reviewer will even tell you how he weights the sound in ways. For example, one of my great bugaboos the whole time I've been writing is the fact that almost nobody gets the mid-bass right on a speaker. That, to me, is the big troublesome area. And I heard a wonderful tale from a reviewer friend of mine who said about this very expensive and highly touted label, well, she listens to Frank Sinatra a lot, and these speakers don't have the baritone quality that makes him sound smoky, the identifying Sinatra signature. And that's mid-bass, and that's probably in crossovers, which and does that answer your question, sort of? Okay.
Okay.
Next.
Next question. Yes.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Harry Zwieben. First of all, I want to thank you for especially the early days of the magazine with all of the music reviews. I'm thinking specifically of series about EMI or Decca, RCA records and recordings, and I learned the classical repertoire reading those reviews and following those series. And thinking about the early part of your talk tonight, you mentioned this gulf between reviewers catering to advertisers, essentially, and kind of addressing their audience. It seems to me, I've watched increasingly with, as younger listeners are listening to lower res formats, MP3 and so forth, the magazines are, it seems at the same time, are educating people less and less. And if you share that perception, how can, do you think reviewers can change that climate? It doesn't feel like there's education going on, as you kind of alluded to. And that's one of the things that I've been missing.
Well, what would you think they should be doing to educate on music?
Well, perhaps talking about, maybe a series of labels, maybe a series on, I don't know, Hyperion or Shandas or this label or that label, and what recordings are good and what they've taught reviewers about the music, and have a reviewer, maybe, and that's just classical, and maybe we do the same with jazz or do the same with alternative music. And I know there are music reviews in the magazine. I'm sorry to make this question so long, but I'm wondering how we bridge this gulf so we're not a bunch of middle-aged white guys coming to these events that are so wonderful, and we can bring in more listeners, more people, so that, and expose them to gear as a way to get through that highway that you talked about, so that they can learn more music and learn about that music through the recordings and through the gear, and while not catering to the advertising. What would you recommend, if I'm onto something, or if anybody else, if you share that perception, how can reviewers or magazines address that?
I'm not sure I really understand what you're getting at exactly. In my opinion, the answer would be very simple, and if it sounds like I'm blowing it off, I'm not trying to. I think if you write about music with passion, you solve the problem. And I mean informed passion. Like when we started the magazine, there was a world of difference between an Angel and an EMI. And of course, one of you brought more of the music, and generally speaking, that also allowed us to introduce a whole class of composers. And it was by finding the differences in the sound of the labels and finding things that we were passionate about. I mean, for example, today, none of the magazines, in my opinion, do much in the way of serious criticism of popular music, of the stuff that's popular now to the generation that we have to reach if we are to survive. We've got everybody and their brother out there with phones and with music 24 hours a day, which we didn't have when I started. So the question is, how do you convert that enthusiasm into education and into a high-end passion? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly
Well, when Mike Mercer was here last year I made a speech, he said something very interesting. He said that he thought every dealer should have docking stations for the iPods and the players. And what the dealers would do would have, say, one system do a low price system, but it would be that docking station. The next docking station would be to a slightly more expensive one and up, so that people could take their players, their iPods and stuff, and hear what effect our components are having on the music, and hear how much more they could hear than they are hearing through these little bud earphones. Now, I think that's the direction to go, and since he made that speech, I don't know that I know any dealer who's done that, although there may be one somewhere. And I called up John Chin, who's at Great O Labs, and they're still making great headphones, by the way. And I told him that Mercer had said this, and that I didn't understand the resistance of dealers to the young and to women, but then particularly to the new generation. I think dealers are a dying art, by the way, I should say that. And he said, well, I have a shop downtown, a good one in Manhattan, and the college kids go by, and there are hundreds every hour. And so he said to the guy, do you have any headphones in the window? No. Does that tell you anything? If that tells you anything, then you can see the dilemma that I think we face. And I think that you put your finger on it. Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Jonathan Novick. You made a point when you opened up, you talked about the absolute sound being recreating the live music. The problem these days with the change in recording techniques that I see is that people are recording at home. They're going on to Pro Tools, they're using Auto-Tune. The final works that they produce, particularly with pop music, but it's also happening in jazz, not happening in classical, thankfully, but what is produced never existed in real time. It's a manufactured recording. So one of the problems that I see, interested in your commentary on, how do you judge a system when you're listening to something?
You don't use that kind of music to judge the system. That's how you get out of it. You can listen to it with fidelity. It can be your roadside attraction. You can listen to it whether it's good recording or bad recording, and that is perfectly as it should be. And that's the kind of reviews I will probably have if I were doing a separate publication or something like that. But I don't think that, I would not think of using some of the multi-mic'd things because they're not real. I mean, I wouldn't know how to tell what the real sound of an amplified instrument is because the only amplified instrument I play is a stereo system. So I think that what you have to do is realize that you've got to pick out some material that will let you know how truthful your reproductive system, you're reproducing. Excuse me, guys. I've been up too high.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ramon Sen. I'm with the Santa Fe Audio Society. And Harry, do you think that you and J. Gordon Holt for the last 30, 40 years steered the American industry, audio industry, towards this neutrality and this non-coloration ideal, which by what you guys have written over the years, and also what's going on in Europe and in Japan, which obviously many would say that many of their audio products are colored. And also, doesn't a cello have color? Doesn't a violin have color? Doesn't a microphone have color?
And you cannot reproduce that without a great system. You've got to be able to tell a Strad from a regular violin. The joy of a great system is that you can hear the character of the instruments, the character of the hall. You have a great system to do that. And the reason the reason we move toward tonal neutrality in the components is to be able to replicate something approximating the original. And that's what I did. And if me and Gordon did that, fine. Really and truly, I think we did the right thing.
Go ahead.
Mark Conti, Veloce Audio. Steering this maybe back towards the reviewer side of things, Harry, and being someone who maybe came to maturity in the 60s, a little bit of a rebellious kind of time, it strikes me that Stereophile and the Absolute Sound that you founded kind of were a response to a very strong industry that had a a mouthpiece kind of situation going where things were measured and praised and so forth, and you came in as the people to speak the truth. And I remember first reading Absolute Sound, and the legitimacy that I sensed was because of reviews that would be very positive, but also were not afraid to be very negative. And it strikes me that today the entire reviewing process has become just really a positive, wonderful thing.
It's
It
an
opens
editorial.
everyone up. And to me, getting back to the gut of the thing and being able to say kind of what you believe is key to us believing what the reviewers say. And I'm just curious as to your comments.
I think you made the sermon. Is there anything I can add to that? By the way, you know about this guy's battery-operated tube line stage that I mentioned at the beginning. Well, the fact is that it gets you closer to the sound by removing a major source of distortion, which is the AC signal. It isolates it with this battery, with the power supply.
Okay. I have a question.
Oh, you're not allowed. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's taken me 3 to 4 years to get my system set up the way I really like it, okay, to really maximize it, to get it sounding as good as I think it can. Maybe it can even sound better, okay? How can a reviewer, with its endless procession of equipment coming into his listening room, possibly accurately judge the potential of a piece of equipment over such a short period of time? And the magazines used to come out every quarter. Now they come out every month. I think once it came out every 6 months, but that was just once
Well,
or twice.
first of all, a reviewer knows his listening environment. And in that listening environment, he has certain reference components that he tries to keep there. I believe in the long-term loan, and if it's really good, I ask if I can keep it, because I don't want to change everything at once. That way madness lies. But what we'll do, for example, let's say I'm testing a speaker. We'll try it we'll listen to it with the standard setup, then we'll change to see if it changes with the setup. We'll substitute components as much as we can to see if we've got the essential character of the component under review. And this we have to do, it's a process of trial and error, and it is not done quickly and not done overnight. If you have to put out the reviews like this, this, and this, I mean, it takes us a long time. Joey, who's my setup guy right here in the corner, Joey Weiss, stand up. He can tell you what efforts we go to, and he's a great setup man because he won't rest until he gets it. We did the 8 cartridges and went crazy because it took forever to make sure that we got he did the Fosco meter, which I thought was one of the great inventions of all time. That lets you see azimuth. We do azimuth alignment, the magnetic alignment, the VTA, everything to make sure that we were hearing the cartridge. We picked out a tone arm that I thought was really and truly the best that I had heard. Best I heard. You didn't hear he said the best tone arm in the world, did you? And it had arm wands, and we could make relatively quick changes. And when we did make a change, we used the same material. And we picked out, for the cartridge report, we picked out 3 discs that we really liked, that I found challenging. And we did them, each cartridge. And we took our time, and if we weren't happy with something, we went back. We cleaned the records. You have to do that. I didn't have the Furotech then. I hate to think what more might have been done. But you know, what you have to do is you do it step by step by step. If you got a preamp in you like, you got to hear what that can do with different sources. You do, and you have to hear it with different amplification at the other end. And sometimes I do something like, if I find a really good reference, for example, my cables, I consider as good as I've heard, and they don't change with the system. And that's one of the reasons I use them. They stay the same no matter what use I put them to. So I consider them a standard. And they allow me to listen to other things instead of the cables. Now, cables are a nightmare, as you well know. And reviewers have to discover the cables are like tone controls. If you want to adjust the sound of your system without one of those old tone control devices, change your cables. And I can't say it's easy. It isn't easy, and it's not supposed to be easy. But there's some things you can do faster, especially if you know your room. I'm lucky. I have 2 really good rooms, and those are post-fire at my house. And they are really neutral with very few only one node in one room, and that's in the corner, I mean, in the bay window. Then you sort of know that the room is not adding character. Now, a lot of reviewers have rooms that cause rising high ends or sunken high ends, and so you can see that. That's Carl Marchesota. You want to say that out loud?
Big problem with reviewing, there's a lot of problems. One of the problems is,
Stand
obviously,
up.
we don't have standard rooms for people to review. Loudspeakers are subject to their environment. Many reviewers have anything but flat rooms to listen to. So now you get confusion in the public because one reviewer says this speaker is great because he happens to have a room that has a rising low end and the speaker has limited bass. Next reviewer gets it, he's got a flat room, he says this speaker is terrible, right? So you think the reviewers are crazy. They're not really crazy because they're listening in different environments. Doesn't apply to amplifiers so much as other things, but in speakers it's paramount that you have to know what environment. And he's blessed with a house and rooms that are almost like listening outside. They have like no character. No other reviewer I've ever run into in 30 years has rooms like this. So everyone else has a colored room to some degree. They don't tell anybody about it. They tell you it's perfect, then they hear this, that, and the other. The comment I wanted to make was how can we focus reviewers in general to get back to describing what they hear as it relates to live absolute sound, rather than giving their opinion whether this is better than the last speaker they heard, the last amplifier they heard, which is of limited usefulness, especially now compared to 30 years ago. It's much harder to hear high-end equipment, which is why this show exists. Everybody comes here because where else are you going to hear all this stuff, right? But now that you don't have 400 dealers in a city to hear all this stuff yourself, which is the best thing, the next best thing is to come here, hear it for yourself if you can, or read about someone's accurate description of what it sounds like, which you don't say anymore. That's what he started a magazine with. He didn't say, I like this, I hate this. This sounds like this. The real thing sounds like that. You judge for yourself if this fits your boat. Another question I was raised last night was, how do you trust a reviewer? It's the same way you trust a food critic. You see what he says, you go out and you check it for yourself. And if you agree with the guy, you start to gain confidence in what he writes about future things. And if you think he's all whack and he's out of his mind, then you don't read him anymore. You go find someone else. Finally, you find a reviewer you kind of agree with. That's how you get confidence in a reviewer. None of them are perfect. They're all operating under different conditions. But what's different now is the rules have changed. That's what he's trying to touch on. The rules are now different. There's a lot of stress on the industry. Print magazines are under a lot of stress to survive. Okay? Advertising is much more important now than it used to be. There's all kinds of factors. But the main thing is if we can get people to describe what they hear, then you judge. If they tell you they think it's great, it's a really very little usefulness to anybody. Because how do you know you're going to agree? And it's only under their condition anyway. So, and a lot of people are judging things at shows under ridiculous conditions, which he would never allow when he ran the magazine. One of the rules was, you don't comment on stuff at shows. It's either in your reference system or forget about it, because vagaries will screw up everything, you know. So the best thing could be the worst. There's no way. So there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. Confusion is bad. Education is good. And the industry has gone in the wrong direction, I think, in my opinion. They should describe what they hear as it relates to the real thing, and then you judge it. And I think it's more important now than ever because it's hard to find this stuff. And the more esoteric it is and the higher the performance it is, the fewer dealers are capable of handling that product. It makes it even more difficult for you. So if you want an NAD receiver, you can find it anywhere, right? If you want a NOLA speaker, good luck. You know, we have very few dealers that far apart, they're qualified, but oftentimes you can't get near one. So, and that applies to a lot of people in this industry. So I think it's more important that reviewers be, I don't know if you can do it. That's why I was going to ask him. I don't know if it's possible, but if they can be refocused and describing what they hear, it would be a lot more helpful than saying, I think this is better than that, that's better than this has more bass than that. It's just confusion, really. So.
Thank you, Carl. One
Next
of the
question.
advantages, ladies and gentlemen, there are some ladies, yes, was the multiple commentary system. Guess why? Because the differences in rooms would average out in the comments on the thing. Because I knew not every reviewer had a perfect room. And so how do you get around that? You pick a component that is essentially honest and truthful and expose it to people with different reference systems, different environments, to see what they have to say. And that gives the consumer a better sense, the user, you, the music lovers, of what the component might be. You still have to check it out. It's not going to solve everything, and it doesn't. Questions? Or
Go ahead.
Hi, Arnold Martinez, Tweak Studio in Chicago. I did bring up this question to you last year at the CES about reviewing individuals. There are a lot of great equipments out there, but it's just like racing. You have a good equipment, and there are a lot of beginners out there in the high-end industry. Probably a majority of my clients, because I'm a dealer, a lot of them probably do not know how to even operate or push adapt to the right 2496 or whatever technical it is. And I'm probably one of those person, and I don't know everything either, and I sell these equipment. And I did mention to you about reviewing dealers. How about reviewing individual installers who are qualified to actually educate beginners that are buying? Because right now, as a dealer, the market has gotten saturated, and there are also you can always build a market. And educating them, as one of the gentlemen said earlier, is an important factor in the industry. And I think that, from my point of view, that we've got race driver that races, and you've got Michael Schumacher, you've got all good race drivers. How about like Joe?
You want me to answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we should review dealers. I really do think we should, and I don't know quite why we don't. Some friends of mine went into a dealer. The records weren't cleaned. The system was hooked up wrong. And there were elementary things that any dealer should know. And these days, given the quality of equipment, the dealer is one of the stumbling blocks to getting to real high-end sound. I don't know how, given the complexion of the magazines, and I mentioned mine and others, how I would love to do it. And what I want to do is I want to send people out dressed like Joey, for example. No, but I mean, this is a perfect example. Joey is a recording engineer. He does records, music. But people blow him off if he doesn't look like what they want, or it doesn't look as if he has the money they want. And they do that to everybody at a certain age. They do it to women. Find a woman in this audience who, tell me. Go ahead, say it.
Oh, I've been ignored in the finest establishments.
You want to identify yourself? I know who you are.
My name's Karen Richardson. I've been in the industry for about 40 years, and I actually wrote a few articles for the Absolute Sound in fairly early days.
If you guys have any ideas, now maybe if all of us got to, I mean, not me, but started writing to the magazines and saying, I think, a lot of you did write and say, I think you should review dealers. Given the critical situation dealers are in, we might be able to have a positive influence to create a better set of high-end dealers and make them more open to women, to young people, to people that they wouldn't look at twice. I mean, I would hate to think, I used to walk into these stores when I was younger, and they didn't know who I was, and they'd say, well, I know Harry Pearson, I'm his best friend. I said, I know him too, but I'm not his best friend, maybe. But there's so much work we have to do, and getting all of you here together is a basic core. We need to get reviewers in magazines better. And I didn't want to criticize specific reviewers in magazines, although practices like use of the word best and stuff, I do. I want your help. I'm here asking for it, because I want to make better journalism. And it is journalism. If you go into a dealer and they can't show off a good record, or if they don't have a record, or if their CD player is hooked up to something that inverts phase, there are all kinds of things that you should know. And you're not going to hear. Question?
Question.
Okay, we'll take one more question, and then everybody can escape the clutches of HP, including HP. Okay, Vita.
Go ahead.
Louder.
It seems like the most probable forum for criticizing magazines is the letters section of the magazines. And yet somehow I always get the feeling that the editorial response is always a little too defensive, a little too self-effacing, and I don't know that any progress is ever made when magazines are criticized in the letters column? And could you maybe elaborate on why that might be?
I could brag on myself, and I will. I believe that letters from the public, uncensored, unscreened, are the soul of a magazine. And I built my magazine on those letters. I found some of my, I did. Tony Cordesman came to me through that, and he turned into a reviewer, different type of reviewer, but one I needed, the mechanical type who did covered all the points. I found Art Pfeffer, who was the best writer about music, classical music I'd practically found ever. I found half a dozen of my best writers by opening the letters section, and yeah, I'd get saucy back. I remember somebody, this is going to get cut out too, I know, but I remember some dentist writing me and saying that I had not reviewed the latest Panasonic player, integrated unit. And he was going on me about how I was prejudiced against the Japanese and how ignorant I was and how he knew everything. And so finally I said, I can suggest an orifice you have that you can stuff that Panasonic player into. And because you do get jerky letters, and I think it's fair, if you're not being unkind or biased or bigoted and all that crap, to tackle a wrong idea in a letter. And that makes controversy, and that produces more letters, by the way. And they say, Pearson, you are an asshole after all, you know, we got you. And I really do believe this, and I know that, God, I shouldn't say this, I know that letters sections have gotten pale, and that letters that are really critical are not, the criticism aren't really addressed thoroughly by the staff. This is true of everybody. I know that really critical letters sometimes don't make it. And I don't know what to do about it because, wait and see. I may know what to do about this. Guys, I really appreciate your coming in. I appreciate the quality of the questions, but I want your help. And if you could give me your help, you'll be giving the industry your help. I want you to write. I want you to criticize. Write and say, why don't you ever publish any tough letters like this one? And you might even want to send it to several magazines and see if anybody does publish it. Anyway, thanks, guys.